With a new edition of Warhammer 40k likely to be inbound in summer, which units and box sets might be a bit better to pick up than normal, and which ones might be better avoided in the face of uncertainty. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today I thought we'd talk about the idea of what to collect for 11th edition 40k, as the end of an edition tends to be an unusual time. The vague prospect that things could change in really quite a big way for Warhammer 40k in the not too distant future, though we don't know specifically how yet. As we talked about in a fair few previous videos, Games Workshop's 40k editions tend to be on a fairly predictable timescale, typically 3-year cycles, and with an end edition campaign into full swing, there's nothing to hint that Games Workshop will disrupt that at this point. If they do what they did with 8th, 9th and 10th edition, it means that we'd most likely expect the dawn of 11th edition Warhammer 40k around about June 2026. That's be around about 5 or 6 months to go of 10th edition at this point. 11th edition probably isn't going to get announced for several months yet though, and as a result we don't really know for certain what's going to happen. Though between Games Workshop's normal patterns and all the leaks and rumours, there's a fair few things that seem likely. Most are guessing that it's more likely to be a soft rule reset, more focused around core rules changes as opposed to a full index reset like we had with 10th. If that happens, then it means that current codexes and detachments might well stay around, though potentially with some adaptations. It's believed that it's going to be Orcs vs Space Marines in the big launch box, so a big time for both of those factions, likely with lots of kits updated. And if the main changes of this one are sort of like 9th edition, where they more did core rulebook changes as opposed to scrapping everything to start again, it seems like Games Workshop would make a fair few changes to try and improve on 10th edition and sell 11th edition based on the way that things are going to be done differently, with a few potential areas like say changes to Wargear costs or how terrain works that could absolutely make an impact on what might look like a better purchase after 11th edition comes out. As is usually the case with picking up Warhammer things in general, the normal internet advice of models staying the same but rules change gets more true now than ever. Generally, if you pick up Games Workshop kits that aren't at a risk of update, you'll be able to use them in some form or other in 11th edition. But that doesn't mean that there might not be some slightly better or worse choices. In this one I thought I could just share a few thoughts as to a few things that might just be slightly unusually better or worse purchases compared with normal if it were say sometime mid-edition and there wasn't some unknown reset lurking on the horizon. First up, perhaps a fairly direct and obvious one, are the starter sets for 10th edition. These have generally tended to be pretty good deals for the miniatures inside them, and I certainly argue that for the money for the plastic, the current Warhammer 40k starter set is one of the very best deals that Games Workshop has on 40k miniatures at the moment. Basically paying way less than a Combat Patrol box set for an amount of plastic that Games Workshop might well sell in 2 Combat Patrols elsewhere. Obviously lots of Space Marine players and Tyranid collectors will already have the miniatures in these ones. They have been readily available since the Leviathan box set in 10th, but just bear in mind that this box set will probably go away, and it might do so a few months before the edition comes out. I remember this happening with both the 8th and 9th edition starter sets, where they were suddenly massively more valuable after the new edition had come out and the miniatures were not available at that discount anymore, and still very likely be replaced by something new, I guess Space Marines against Orcs, if that is what winds up happening. This time around it looks like it could be a little bit different. I still guess that this box pictured will go away, which is the all very miniature focused one that doesn't have any other things to bump up the cost of the box. Though it seems like we'll still have the ultimate starter set on sale. That's the one with these miniatures, some Barb Gaunt, a Librarian and some terrain, and that's already being sold as the 40k Combat Patrol starter set. For just collecting Space Marines or Tyranids though, that one's maybe a little bit less directly an awesome deal given the terrains in it, and does kind of depend on how much you value the expensive Games Workshop plastic terrain versus other stuff that you might buy. In any case, I just wouldn't be blindsided when this box set pictured goes out of production. While we're on that subject, another discount deal that's probably not going to be around for so much longer is the Orcs Combat Patrol. This one's the Beast Snagger one with 20 Beast Snagger boys, a Beast Boss and 4 Squighog boys. It's maybe not directly helpful to every single Orc collection out there, kind of depends if you want to add the Beast Snagger element to the army. But if they follow their normal Combat Patrol patterns, there's a reasonable chance they remove this one and release a new one with the Orc Codex coming out, and again presuming that they are going to be the antagonist faction. If so though, then it could be a reasonable discount deal to get a good start on an Orc army for one deal that might go away, and hopefully be replaced by some good new ones with that rumoured Armageddon launch box and follow-up ones after that. One obvious example of things to avoid, and particularly for the Orcs and Space Marines, if you're intending to use them in game it might worth being a bit wary of the remaining Firstborn Space Marines, where if 10th edition was anything to go by it could well be a death knell for them, or at least for the current range of models. I'm sure a good few of them will be refreshed and released at Primaris scale, particularly those Vanguard veterans. Games Workshop might not get around to doing a complete purge of everything that came before Primaris, Probably the best place to know that will be in the actual Space Marine Codex when we get it though. In 10th we awkwardly had a bunch of units with index rules that were promptly sent to Legends when the Codex came out, and that caught a few people by surprise. The same is likely true of things like the Ravenwing Black Knights, the remaining Firstborn Space Wolves, or the entire Grey Knight range. While those ones likely won't happen quite as fast as the Space Marines, presuming we don't get them in the End Edition campaign of course, there's at least better odds than normal that they happen at some point in 11th, and we don't know when the Codexes have come out for those factions. For the Orcs, you could say similar about a bunch of their kits from 5th edition, perhaps things like Looters, Knobs, the Warbiker kits. They could be ones that Games Workshop's a bit more liable to release new stuff for. They're probably the most imminent ones, and the turn of the new edition doesn't necessarily change it too much for others. There's certainly higher odds that some of the truly ancient kits that are most clearly in need of an update might get one in the not so very distant future. Things like Chaos Bikers, Locust Destroyers, or the Astra Militarum's Kaschan Jungle Fighters might be a few good examples. Just in general, in collecting 40k, newer kits tend to be a bit safer than old. Next up, this one's definitely a bit more of a maybe, but one area that seems like it's at least possible for change will be certain bits of Wargear having paid points costs for them. It was certainly one area of criticism of 10th edition when it came out, where after paring down a bunch of Wargear choices at the start of 10th they just outright removed them all, which works okay for some units but maybe a little bit less so for others, particularly when there's just one obvious big upgrade choice that's better than not having it. The main thing that made me suspicious that they might change it is because in a very rare design interview on Warhammer Plus they basically hinted that Wargear should have a points cost for certain big hitting select bits of it. It just seemed a very unusual thing to say if it wasn't planned for the next edition. It certainly hasn't happened in 10th. It's not really something that's very easy to take action on so much at the moment, but probably worth just being aware of the possibility that going with all the fanciest and big hitting stuff isn't necessarily always going to be optimal through every edition. In general, it's not going to be the worst idea to use magnets in creations, particularly for things where they have really easy choices to swap in and out, or potentially for any models that you're assembling at least fairly close to when the edition drops. You could leave a few key things unglued or held in with blue tack or something, until we know whether Games Workshop's choosing to change it up in a big way. There's no actual guarantees they necessarily do anything with this though. And if you assemble your models with any sort of legal Wargear combo, you will be able to use them. If they did start charging, say, 5 or 10 points for every Power Fist or something, it just might not necessarily always be what you want. Before we move on to some other things that might be worth avoiding or targeting, I'll just give a quick shout out to today's video sponsor in the Magnet Baron. They're a US based supplier of all things neodymium, with lots of magnets available targeting 40k kits. Magnets are certainly something I use a really good amount of in my own hobby. In particular for big things like vehicles with hard points with a whole bunch of different options, it's quite fun to be able to swap Imperial Knights or Lehman Russ's weapons around when needed, and as mentioned particularly so when Games Workshop choose to change the rules around. The Magnet Baron's got a fair few kits that can help with that, as well as a general supply of all sorts of regular magnets of different shapes and sizes. They also have ones tailored to certain 40k units. One good example being this Canis Rex Knight kit with a bunch of 3D printed components, so you can basically follow through the instructions, slot the magnets into places and not have to drill anything. That one comes with some full instructions included, and they do have several other kits that are a bit more simple than that. I'll circle back to them briefly at the end of the video. They've got other things like flight stand bundles and flush shaped magnets to go under bases. In any case, check them out, links down in the video description below, and a big thank you to them for sponsoring this one. Getting back into it though, and in the face of uncertainty, I feel like you've always got to have an honourable shout out for all the people out there who might have plenty of Warhammer already and just haven't got around to assembling and painting it. If there's 5 or 6 months till a new edition, it could well be a good opportunity to clear some of the backlog that's built up, perhaps particularly focusing on anything that doesn't need Wargear choices or selection. Maybe delay some purchases until after things have changed around and 11th edition has come about. Generally I find it a pretty good feeling to dust off something I bought far too long ago and actually get it together and ready to be fielded in new games. And when you're collecting for an edition of 40k when you don't entirely know what the rules might be, maybe some of that backlog could well be useful to have ready to field on the tabletop. For those who are looking to expand one given 40k faction though, I'd say that the run up to a new edition is a pretty good time to be collecting some faction staples, and if your army happens to be lacking for them, getting maybe a few more of the basics of an army that might well be useful addition to addition, on a whole variety of different army builds, as opposed to really collecting specifically for one niche detachment that might or might not get so great support next time around. I feel like perhaps particularly good examples of this could be things like basic troops or dedicated transports, particularly for transport vehicles that apply for armies that could take a range of different units in them, maybe Chimeras for the Guard, Sisters Rhinos or Immolators, or the Wave Serpent for the Eldari. They might tend to be a little bit less exciting for some, but that was certainly one I found useful in the past, painting up a Rhino for 8th edition start. I wound up getting a pretty surprising amount of use out of that over the years. Otherwise, if you don't have an overabundance of your basic troops of the army, that could be another reasonable enough addition. Maybe some more guardsmen, chaos legionaries, or necron warriors or something if you've only got a token amount. I'd probably normally say things like space marine intercessors too, though I am kind of wondering how they're going to reinterpret tactical marines, if at all, and if their unit's going to have some sort of fusion with the intercessors. Otherwise, another good category could be more iconic damage dealers of the army, things that if they weren't at least a fair staple in the game, would attract people's attention and lots of demand for making them better. Maybe things like the Lehman Russ tanks for the Guard, Crisis suits for the Tau, a Questoris Knight, or other similar equivalents for other armies. Again, they just feel like they're a bit more likely to get fixes and be pushed to the front of an army if they ever fall too far behind, perhaps compared with, say, slightly more niche choices, like things like, say, Astra Militarum Rattlings or Space Marine Suppressors or something, slightly more niche supporting elements of their army that might well wind up being strong or interesting units, but not necessarily so. For some more things to potentially go lighter on, could basically be any units or options that Games Workshop isn't necessarily guaranteed to support in 11th edition. Compared with certain things, I'd probably be a little bit more cautious about allied units, as they quite often tend to be a rule set that gets interpreted in quite different ways from one 40k rule set to the next. I typically expect that certain staples like adding in a single knight to an army will usually be allowed, but they're not quite so absolutely 100% guaranteed to be able to be fielded in the first place, and even if they are, there's perhaps more of a chance than most that they're not really going to be something that's going to be optimal to field. There's a couple of factions with their fate in question at the moment, Chaos Demons and Deathwatch. Games Workshop signals that they might not be getting quite so great support, given they didn't bother to release a Combat Patrol box set or a Codex for 10th edition for them. They might well change course and decide to bring them back to full faction status, though it's not guaranteed. For the Demons, they're definitely still going to be a thing in 40k, though lots of people have speculated that the removal of the Codex might be the first step towards making them more deity-aligned in the deity-specific codexes now they exist. If you want to collect Chaos Demons in the meantime, it might be a bit more worth focusing on one god's deity primarily, as opposed to an even mix, and bear in mind that they do also have a few units that don't have models on sale currently, so are probably going to get sent to Legends at some stage. Things like Epidemius and the Blue Scribes could be good examples of that. For the Deathwatch, their Primaris kill team is the most safe thing. They'll absolutely be able to be fielded in some way. Hopefully the mixed Primaris kill teams also stick around as well. It feels like Games Workshop has shifted the way that kill teams have worked just about every edition in really quite a big way since they came out. Never mind in 10th edition when they sent them all to Legends for a bit. Another upcoming one could be the Forge World and Imperial armor units for Custodies or Knights. Just be wary that Games Workshop could pull what they did with the Space Marines for 10th edition unless they say otherwise. While those units are still in Horus Heresy packaging, there's no firm guarantees they couldn't get sent to Legends in Warhammer 40k. We only really found out which things survived and which didn't when we got the Imperial Armor download indexes for 10th. They usually tend to turn up at least fairly early on in the edition. That's likely be the time where we know if there's going to be any sending of these sort of units to Legends or not. Obviously I really quite hope not, and I hope they'll enjoy a bit more mainstream support. But I feel like this one's probably going to be a very relevant question pretty shortly indeed, as it seems that we're going to get a fair few Adeptus Custodes releases for the Horus Heresy soon, which if they do a fair few remakes of the current Forge World range, would have a lot of appeal to 40k Custodes collectors. For some other things that are perhaps a bit more tempting to add in at the moment, if you just wanted to expand the roster of options that you have available to your army, any units out there that you don't already own and don't have a vast array of different wargear can be some pretty easy ones to have that option going forward for your force. Named characters might often fit the bill pretty well, given that you only need one of them to be able to field their datasheets. If you like the look of them, then you could get the Games Workshop sculpt, though it could also be a good excuse to do a bit of conversion work and make some yourself, either to make it fit in more with your army, or potentially to save a bit of money on Games Workshop character prices. Again, that was something I did for 8th edition 40k, basically making a little converted execution force for the 4 assassins. I'll admit not all of them were the best quality, though I felt like the Vindicare and Calidus models came out some of the best, and that fortunately fit quite well with them being some of the most relevant ones to see a fair bit of play over the past few editions, particularly the Calidus in 10th edition. You could apply that to some named characters, though just about any other copy of a unit that you don't already have a single copy of, and has fairly set gear, again could be fairly safe for the future. Maybe things like Chaos Possessed, some Primaris Hellblasters, or some Necron Ophidian Destroyers or something, and obviously models that you like the general look and feel of otherwise. I guess that in itself is also worth mentioning for a slide as well. If rules arguably have a little bit of pressure off as we don't know what's happening, you could see some arguments to maybe getting miniatures that you really like the look or feel of, but might not necessarily see all that much time on the tabletop. Perhaps a big project for a super heavy or something. I certainly wouldn't necessarily bank on a new edition fixing every single model out there though. I still suspect that Games Workshop's going to have some of the same preferences they had for 10th edition. It will be a different turn of events if they decided to start making aircraft fortifications and super heavies particularly mainstream once again. Outside of collecting armies, another thing that you could potentially do would be to build up terrain. It does depend a fair bit on what sort of 40k gamer you are though, and might be a bit more uncertain than it's been in the past. Hobbying up some thematic casual gameplay pieces could well be a pretty good way to spend some time, though given that terrain is one of the things in the core rules that Games Workshop absolutely could change if they wanted to. It might make preset boards worth of 40k terrain that's directly going for certain tournament standards not quite as relevant. As it's such a common criticism, I really wouldn't be too shocked to see Games Workshop try and shake things up from the typical L-shaped ruin boards we've often seen in competitive play. I feel like that would go down pretty positively with a fair few people. Perhaps on the flip side, for sort of getting single copies of staple units, you could look at that from the other perspective and say that it's a less good idea to get quite a specific spam of kind of niche units to the army, and that might apply just a little bit to certain units that are quite good in game right now for one reason or another, but maybe relying more on a rules quirk to get them there than necessarily having loads of strength as a mainstream unit for the faction for guaranteed going forward. Just spamming any one niche thing for an army is a bit less likely to be resilient to having things changed around, as if you have 3 different units for an army, then there's a pretty reasonable chance that at least one of them might be good, or if you have 3 of the same, it might be very all or nothing depending on whether they're worth it. Maybe a few examples could be the Repulsor Executioner for the Black Templars with all its rerolls built in. That feels like the definition of a rule that could very easily go away with a new codex for them. And perhaps detachment-specific things like the Bulgrin for the Astra Militarum with the Commissar. If you like the models or you think you get some good value out of them before the turn of the edition, then by all means add them to a Grizzled Company army. But if in the 11th edition it makes more sense to play guard with a different detachment, then that little formation might fall by the wayside. For a fair few of these, it might depend a bit on how much you get games in. If you're playing 40k every week or more frequently, then there might be plenty of time to get lots of games in with your new units. If you're a bit more of an occasional gamer, trying to chase the meta at this particular time could be a fairly bad timing for it. Finally, for models, I'm sure Games Workshop will keep the discount box sets coming. Again, presuming that you actually like the miniatures that are in them, they could be reasonable enough to target, as at least you get a little bit more bang for your buck compared with just buying things elsewhere. I guess we'll get a few more for the end edition campaign, though they might be kind of short-lived if they sell out online as fast as the Necron Destroyer Battalion that they just did. And finally, beyond models, codexes and rules are another area entirely. At the moment, most people are expecting the current crop of codexes to stick around and then get gradually phased out by the codex release cycle in 11th edition, though Games Workshop could still surprise us and just invalidate them all en masse like they did in 10th. Though either way, if Space Marines and Orcs wind up being the antagonist factions, their codexes in particular are going to have a very short shelf life if you pick them up now. And for other factions, you might also think about how much use you're going to get out of their book in the next 5 or 6 months too. If you want to play the army and get the rules from the official source as opposed to other places like Warhapedia or New Recruits, it still could wind up that getting a codex is going to be necessary to access things on the Warhammer app. Though we'll know a fair bit more about that when 11th edition is actually here and we know how the rules are going to be delivered, as well as just maybe holding off on buying codexes for a little while. You could also take a look through any that you have and maybe think about selling them on eBay or other places if you think that that book is probably not going to get too much use before the turn of the next edition. Particularly for the Space Marine and Orc codexes, it might not be the most unhelpful thing to get ahead of the curve if you do think that you'd be able to get by without the physical imprint book until the next one comes out later in the year. In any case though, hope you've enjoyed a little bit of speculation and possibilities for the next edition, and a few things that might be potentially a little bit better or worse purchases because of the uncertainty. Let me know your thoughts and what you're doing at the moment. Obviously we've got a fair bit of 10th edition left to play still. I look forward to hearing your opinions down in the comments below though. That's it for this one, though before I go, I'll just cycle back to today's video sponsoring the Magnet Baron. As mentioned, suppliers of magnets for wargaming purposes, as well as their more tailored model kit offerings. They've also got this as one of their more popular options with their magnetizing starter bundle. If you're new to this side of the hobby, it could be an easy enough one-click way to get things started. It has a drill and pin vise, some applicators, super glue, and a set of magnets to get you started. They have just about every size of shape of magnet that you need for wargaming purposes. They've got some nice flush fit ones that can fit under bases for magnetic transport solutions. They've got lots of tailored offerings that work well for various Warhammer kits out there, several ones that work well for other knights and a range of other things. And also they've got those flight stand bundles as well, perhaps particularly nice for the bigger and chunkier hover vehicles out there. In any case, you can check them out, link down in the video description, and a big thank you to them for sponsoring this one. In any case, I'll leave this one there for now though. Feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics if you'd like to see more like this. I do tend to post 40k videos each day, And if you'd like to support the channel and keep these videos coming, check out the Patreon page, links down in the video description below. Channel patrons get a few advantages, seeing occasional videos early, occasional votes to see what sort of things happen next on the channel, an automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link's in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.